Before I began reading Roy Dilley's collection, The Problem of Context, my ideas and opinions around the importance of context were very different. I began reading with my mind quite made up that context was a simple thing to comprehend, that it was something that contained extra information relating to any given scenario and was therefore important as it had the power to change the way in which information within that scenario could be interpreted. Without full context, a person can misunderstand or be ignorant to the full story, so I thought that to refer to context as a problem was quite an interesting statement to make. So feeling quite on the defensive, I jumped into this book. One of the first suggestions put forward here is that meaning is indeed linked with context. However, most speech, actions and events are open to interpretation, open to having meaning ascribed to them. As we often ascribe our own meanings onto events, multiple meanings can exist, and so too can multiple contexts, which I had never considered. I had thought of context as a singular rather than one of many. It suggested that context is often considered as a frame placed around a meaning. If something is to be taken out of context, this suggests that there is a right and a wrong way to view something, favouring one viewpoint over another. That's not to say there is no definitive truth, but that multiple parties can potentially be correct at the same time in what they say, despite having different interpretations of an event. This makes context hard to define, as the factors in which it can be placed are infinite. These include place, time, power, and so on. Relevant context is not given, but is constructed, based on roles, interests, purposes, and power of those contextualizing, making it a useful tool within the power politics, as context, whatever it may be, has the power to change the meaning of any event based on who is dictating it. Should an individual spend time looking for the meaning of context or just look at the ways in which it is used? It suggested that context shouldn't be invoked for explaining without being understood. I couldn't help but think of the comment sections of articles on Facebook throughout the time that I read this book. So often I've seen people refer to context in an attempt to draw the flow of argument, and thus the favour of those reading the comments, into their control, in line with the way that they themselves view the world. This nicely moves on to constructivist ideas of thinking. The notion that the world doesn't exist but is constructed as one gains knowledge. Knowledge is, however, limited by how much each individual engages with it. The way we view our world is shaped by the language we use, and vice versa. If you know that you are a good person because you mean well by your actions, then you also know that your enemies are monsters because they oppose your actions. Situational context establishes the overall contextual meaning of an expression. The meaning which includes all relevant aspects of the conceived situation. Context is not something considered to be uniquely determined, but instead is to be interpreted. That is to say, it is not for the speaker to determine, but for the listener to interpret. I'm not sure how much I agree with this. I can understand the logic behind it, but I think that to an extent something is either correct or it isn't. Something is well-meaning or it isn't. Something is a joke or it isn't. I don't think that it's necessarily always up for a third party to determine, especially if that third party is, let's say, prone to taking offence at just about everything. That said, maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe. Perhaps this is down to a simple misunderstanding which causes problems. There's a difference between misunderstanding and not understanding. An example of misunderstanding would be mistaking what I'm saying for something else, while not understanding would be you not being able to work it out at all. One of the authors in the book suggests that because people can have different meanings for words or phrases, understanding can sometimes be misunderstanding at the same time. Context is constituted in a way that is very individual, and therefore is difficult to reference as if it coexists in all interpretations of any event. The best way to explain this is with a hypothetical example. A, B, and C are standing together. A and B are best friends, but C is a stranger. A jokingly calls B a bitch. A knows this is a joke. B knows this is a joke. C interprets this as harassment. The context for A and B is a joke between friends, but the context within C's concern for B's safety is that of witnessing someone being verbally aggressive. Is C wrong for that concern? In this scenario, yes, but in another, possibly not. C could perhaps be forgiven though. Another author in the book suggests that interpretation is as important as knowing, because often, when reading a book or watching a video, the author won't be there to explain exactly what they mean, so you must fill in the gaps yourself. Potentially, you are displacing the author's actual intended meaning with your own. Because different people will ask different questions of events, different contexts will exist. We create the world we perceive, and so we edit and conform the universe into the way we view our lives. creating a sense of order in the process. Knowledge is always personal and will always be in the eye of the beholder. One man's benevolent ruler is another man's dictator. The book suggests that value is a determinant of perception, and perception a determinant of value. We must wish things to be as we see them, and vice versa, or our actions will bring us frustration and pain instead of success. Another suggestion is that there is a certain satisfaction in finding the world to be the same old place it always was, even if that place is one of animosity rather than harmony. Context is something particular and personal, more private to the individual than publicly shared and inherent. Social constructs are, by their nature, personal, and the knowledge required to fill in the gaps itself is contextual. While I don't agree with everything that the authors suggest in this book, it's certainly been an eye-opening read, and I've certainly changed my position from what it was before I started reading. It's actually mildly embarrassing how sure of myself I was before. The nature of academic books is usually that you don't have to agree. In fact, this kind of book, a collection of essays, I don't believe is really intended to be read in one go. It's really meant to be dipped into when needed. It's quite difficult reading if you aren't used to the way that academics conduct themselves, and I would say that this is actually very inaccessible to a lot of people based purely on the way that it's been written. But unfortunately, to a great extent, that's academia in general. That said, if you can get past the way it's written and focus on what's being said, The Problem of Context is quite an eye-opening read.